I'm not asking for a favor, Rachel, my dad said, his voice colder than I remembered. I'm asking you to do your job. The words stung more than I expected. For a moment, I couldn't respond. I sat there gripping the edge of my desk, staring at the man who hadn't been a part of my life for over 20 years. His expression was hard, his tone even harder, and I couldn't decide if it was anger or desperation I heard in his voice. My name is Rachel Monroe. I'm 31 years old, a defense lawyer with a solid career, and a single woman focused on her work. For as long as I can remember, my relationship with my dad has been defined by his absence. He left when I was 9, walking away from my mom and me without so much as a goodbye. Now, 2 decades later, he was sitting across from me, asking for my help. No, kind of demanding it, and I didn't know how to feel. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my thoughts. You're asking me to defend you in court, I said, keeping my voice even. But let's not pretend this is just about me doing my job. You need my help, Dad. And after everything, you think you can just walk in here and demand it? He shifted uncomfortably but didn't look away. This isn't personal, Rachel. It's business. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't think you were the best option. Business. Of course he would frame it that way. My dad had always been about transactions, what people could do for him, what he could get in return. Still, I couldn't ignore the flicker of something else in his voice. Was it guilt? Regret? I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to care. I need to think about it, I said finally, my voice firmer than I felt. If you'll excuse me, I have other clients waiting. He nodded stiffly and stood, smoothing his suit jacket. Take your time, he said, though his tone implied the opposite. But remember, Rachel, I'm fighting for my life here. As soon as he walked out, the tension in the room lingered. I stared at the empty chair he'd just vacated, my thoughts a mess. It wasn't the first time I'd faced a challenging case, but this wasn't just about legal strategy. This was him, the man who left my mom struggling to pay bills, who missed every milestone in my life, and who had been a ghost until now. That night, I called Jessica, my mentor and the closest thing I had to a maternal figure since my mom passed. He just showed up out of nowhere, Jess, I said, pacing my apartment. Like he had every right to ask me for help. No apology, no acknowledgement of what he did, just, I need you. Jessica sighed on the other end of the line. Rachel, this is tough, but you're a lawyer first. The question is, can you separate your personal feelings from the professional obligation? I stopped pacing and stared out the window at the city lights. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm not sure I have a choice. Over the next couple of days, I buried myself in the case file my dad had left behind. It was a mess. He was being accused of embezzling millions from his company, Monroe Investments, and the evidence wasn't exactly in his favor. Bank transfers, falsified reports, and discrepancies in financial records, it all pointed to him. If I took this case, I'd be fighting an uphill battle. But the more I read, the more something felt off. The transactions were too calculated, too clean for my dad. He'd always been impulsive, not the kind of man to pull off something this meticulous. That's when I started digging into his business partner, Alan Carter. His name popped up in a few key documents, and the more I looked, the more I realized he stood to gain if my dad took the fall. I wasn't sure what to do with that information yet, but it planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't ignore. Late one night, after hours of poring over documents, I called Jessica again. This case doesn't add up, I told her. I think someone set him up. Maybe his partner, Alan. Jessica was quiet for a moment before she replied, Rachel, if that's true, you're not just defending your father. You're exposing a deeper issue. Are you ready for what that means? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I don't know if I'm ready, Jess, but I think I have to do this. The next morning, I made my decision. I called my dad and told him I'd take the case, but under one condition, I was running it my way. No interference, no half-truths. To my surprise, he agreed without argument, though I could hear the tension in his voice. Maybe he knew how serious this was. Or maybe he realized he didn't have any other options. Preparing for the first hearing was overwhelming. I had to comb through years of financial records, interview employees, and piece together a narrative that didn't make my dad look like a criminal. All the while, I wrestled with my own feelings. Defending him wasn't just about the case. It felt like stepping into a minefield of unresolved anger and hurt. But I kept telling myself this wasn't personal. This was about doing my job and uncovering the truth. The first time we met in my office to prepare, the tension was thick. He sat across from me, his body language closed off, but his eyes occasionally softened when he thought I wasn't looking. I kept it professional, walking him through the strategy and what I needed from him. But at one point, he broke the silence. "You're good at this," he said, almost reluctantly. I didn't expect this level of competence. I froze for a moment, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or an insult. "I've been doing this for a long time," I replied evenly. "It's what I do." He nodded but didn't say anything else, and just like that, we were back to business. As the weeks went by, the case started to come together, though not without its challenges. Alan Carter, my dad's business partner, was slippery. His deposition was filled with carefully worded statements that hinted at my dad's guilt, while conveniently glossing over his own involvement. I could feel the pressure mounting, both in the courtroom and in my personal life. One evening, after a particularly grueling day in court, I sat down with Jessica over coffee. "He's not an easy client," I admitted. "Half the time it feels like he's holding something back. The other half, he seems genuinely desperate." Jessica sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "That's the thing about family," she said. "They're not just clients. They're a mirror. Every conversation, every argument, it's all tangled up with years of history. But you're doing the right thing, Rachel. You're getting to the truth." Her words stayed with me as we moved closer to the trial date. The more I worked on the case, the more I realized how much was at stake, not just for my dad, but for me. This wasn't just about proving his innocence. It was about proving to myself that I could rise above the past and handle this with integrity. During one of our late-night meetings, the tension finally boiled over. We were reviewing a timeline of transactions when I noticed my dad staring out the window, his attention miles away. "Something on your mind?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just thinking." I set my pen down and leaned back in my chair. "Thinking about what? How you ended up here? Or is it about how you left me and Mom when I was a kid?" The words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't try to soften them. For a moment he looked taken aback, as if I'd hit a nerve he wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Rachel, he started, but I wasn't about to let him dodge this. "No," I interrupted. "We're not brushing past this. You walked out on us, and you never came back. Do you have any idea what that did to Mom? What it did to me? And now you show up in my life. Not to apologize, not to make amends, but because you need something. Do you even care?" His face tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might get defensive. But instead, he sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't have an excuse. I made mistakes, big ones, and the truth is, I didn't think I had the right to come back after everything." His admission caught me off guard. I had spent years imagining what I'd say to him if I ever got the chance, but I never expected him to admit fault so openly. "You didn't even try," I said, my voice trembling. "You left us to pick up the pieces." He nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the window. "And I regret it every single day." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "I don't understand why I took your case in the first place," I said, my voice laced with frustration. "After everything you've done, or really haven't done, why am I here helping you?" He paused, his gaze fixed on the papers scattered across the table. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of regret and something that looked almost like admiration. "Maybe it's because you're a better person than I am," he said softly. I stared at him, taken aback. That's not an answer, I snapped, though his words had thrown me off balance. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I'm doing my job. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. Maybe that's part of it. But the truth is, Rachel, you've got something I never had. Integrity. You could have walked away. You had every right to. But you didn't. Because you have something I lost a long time ago. You actually care about doing the right thing, even when it's hard. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. No integrity? Are you saying you're guilty of this case too? My voice was sharp, cutting through the tense silence. His expression hardened instantly. No, he said firmly, shaking his head. I didn't do what they're accusing me of, Rachel. I might have made bad decisions in my life, plenty of them, but I didn't steal from my own company. I'm not a thief. I studied him closely, trying to read his face. There was something about his tone, an edge of desperation, that made me believe him, at least in that moment. But the past had left me with too much doubt to fully trust him. Then why does the evidence point straight to you? I asked. The transfers, the falsified records, all of it leads back to your name. That's what I'm trying to figure out, he said, his voice rising with frustration. And that's why I need you. Someone set me up, Rachel. I know how it looks, but I didn't do this. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of pity for him, but I wasn't about to let him off the hook that easily. You better hope I can prove that, I said, standing up, because if you're lying, I'm not going to cover for you. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the case, determined to uncover the truth. Alan Carter's name kept coming up in the records, his involvement just subtle enough to escape notice unless you were really looking. It was clear he had positioned himself to benefit from my dad's downfall, but I needed more than suspicions. I needed hard evidence. During one of our strategy meetings, I laid everything out on the table. Alan had access to the accounts, the records, everything, I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd constructed. He's been distancing himself from this company for months, quietly liquidating assets and transferring them to his private holdings. If we can prove he had motive and opportunity, we can shift the focus away from you. My dad listened intently, a rare moment of silence from a man who usually had something to say. Do you really think he's behind all this? He asked, his voice cautious. I do, I replied. But it's not about what I think, it's about what I can prove. And if Alan is as smart as he seems, he's covered his tracks well. It's going to take more than circumstantial evidence to clear your name. The turning point came during a pre-trial deposition. One of Alan Carter's employees, a senior manager named Ellen Price, was called in to provide testimony. At first, her answers were routine, calm, composed, and not particularly revealing. But as I pressed her about the financial discrepancies and Alan's involvement, I noticed her demeanor shift. She started glancing toward the door, her voice faltering ever so slightly. Finally, I decided to take a chance. Ms. Price, I said, my tone firm but not accusatory. Is there anything you'd like to share about Mr. Carter's role in this situation? Anything you might have overheard or witnessed that could provide clarity? She hesitated, visibly torn. The room was silent, save for the faint scratching of the court stenographer's pen. Then, with a deep breath, she said, There was a phone call, a couple of months ago. I overheard Mr. Carter saying, Michael is the perfect scapegoat. Her words were barely above a whisper, but they hit like a thunderclap. I exchanged a quick glance with my co-counsel. Did you report this at the time? I asked. Ellen shook her head. No, I didn't think it was my place, but it's been bothering me ever since. I didn't know if it was relevant until now. While her testimony was a crucial breakthrough, I knew it wasn't enough on its own. We needed something concrete, material proof to back her claims. Without it, Alan could easily argue that her account was hearsay or a misinterpretation. I thanked her for her honesty, promising to follow up. Later that evening, I went over the deposition with our IT investigator, who had been combing through digital records for weeks. We're close, he said, his face illuminated by the glow of his laptop screen. I've been sifting through old email archives, and there are still a few backup files I haven't finished scanning. If Alan left a trail, it's going to be in there. The waiting felt endless, but I held on to the hope that somewhere in the digital dust of Alan's emails was the proof we needed to expose the truth. 2 days later, just as I was beginning to lose hope, the call came. It was our IT investigator, his tone brimming with urgency. "Rachel, I found it," he said. I sat up straighter in my chair. "Found what?" "An email Alan sent to an external accountant," he explained. "It's vague, but he clearly references shifting the blame to your father. He deleted it, but the backup archives preserved a copy. The timestamp lines up perfectly with the period when the financial discrepancies started." My pulse quickened. "What exactly does it say?" He read it aloud. "The way things are structured, Michael will take the fall if this goes south. Keep everything tight on your end." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "It's not just a mistake, Rachel. It's deliberate." I exhaled, relief washing over me. This is it. This is the proof we need. He wasn't done. I also cross-checked the IP address from which the email was sent. It matches Alan's office computer. There's no plausible way he can deny it came from him. I thanked him and hung up, staring at the notes on my desk. Between Ellen's testimony and this email, the puzzle pieces were finally coming together. I had the tools to not only clear my dad's name, but also bring Alan's deceit into the light. The next step was presenting it in court. As much as I wanted to celebrate the breakthrough, I knew the hardest part was still ahead. The day of the court presentation arrived, and the weight of the case pressed down on me as I walked into the courtroom. My dad sat next to me, uncharacteristically quiet, his face a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I placed the folder containing the email and deposition notes on the table in front of me, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. As the proceedings began, the opposing counsel tried to paint my dad as reckless and untrustworthy, a man whose carelessness had jeopardized his company. But I stayed calm, biding my time until it was my turn to present the evidence. When the judge called on me, I rose, holding the email copy in my hand. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "we have new evidence that sheds light on this case. It directly implicates Alan Carter in a deliberate attempt to frame my client." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as I handed copies of the email to the judge and opposing counsel. "This email," I continued, "was retrieved from a backup server after Mr. Carter attempted to delete it. In it, he clearly outlines a plan to shift blame onto my client, Michael Monroe, should the financial discrepancies come under scrutiny." I let the room absorb the gravity of the evidence before adding, "Furthermore, we have corroborating testimony from an employee who overheard Mr. Carter referring to my client as the perfect scapegoat." The judge nodded, signaling for me to continue. "This isn't a case of negligence or incompetence on my client's part. This is a calculated effort by Mr. Carter to cover his tracks and deflect responsibility." For the first time during the trial, I saw Alan's composure crack. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing nervously at his attorney. My dad, on the other hand, looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years: respect. As the judge reviewed the evidence and listened to closing arguments, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. I kept my focus on the judge's expression, searching for any sign of where things might be headed. When the gavel finally struck, signaling an adjournment, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "The court finds sufficient grounds to shift its focus to the allegations against Mr. Alan Carter," the judge declared. "The trial concerning Michael Monroe is adjourned indefinitely, pending further investigation of the new evidence provided." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. My dad turned to me, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he looked like he might say something, but he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded, as if acknowledging everything I'd done. In the days that followed, the charges against my dad were formally dismissed. The focus shifted entirely to Alan, who quickly found himself at the center of a full-blown investigation. The media caught wind of the story, and headlines about Alan's alleged misconduct dominated the news. For the first time, my dad was free of the cloud of suspicion that had hung over him for months. But for me, the victory felt complicated. Clearing his name had been my goal, but it also brought back memories and emotions I wasn't prepared to deal with. The evening after the charges were dismissed, my dad and I met in my office. He had asked for a meeting, his tone uncharacteristically soft when he called. As he walked in, I noticed how different he looked, less guarded, almost vulnerable. He took a seat across from me, the silence stretching as he seemed to search for the right words. "I wanted to thank you," he began, his voice low, "for everything you've done. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm grateful." I leaned back, folding my arms. "You don't have to thank me. I did what I was supposed to do as your lawyer." He flinched slightly at my tone, but he nodded. "You were more than just my lawyer. You saved my life, Rachel. And you did it despite everything I put you through. I didn't deserve that kind of loyalty." I studied him for a moment, trying to gauge his sincerity. "It wasn't loyalty," I said finally. "It was about doing what was right. And honestly, it wasn't for you. It was for me. To prove that I could rise above all the things you failed to be." His shoulders slumped, the weight of my words settling over him. "I wish I could change the past," he said quietly. "I wish I'd been there for you and your mom, but I can't. All I can do is tell you how proud I am of the person you've become, even if I didn't have a hand in it." For a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. Sympathy. But it didn't erase the years of absence and pain. "I don't need your pride," I said, my voice steady. "I needed a father, and I didn't have one when it mattered most." He nodded, unable to argue. "I hope someday you'll find it in your heart to forgive me." I didn't respond, letting the silence speak for itself. I didn't forgive him. At least, not then. Maybe I never will. Some wounds run too deep, and no amount of apologies can erase the scars they leave behind. But as I sat there, watching my father grapple with the weight of his mistakes, I realized something important. I didn't need his approval or his pride. What I needed was to prove to myself that I could rise above the pain, the abandonment, and the doubt. And I had. I cleared his name, uncovered the truth, and showed him the person that I was. As he left my office that day, I stayed behind for a moment, letting the quiet settle around me. I wasn't the little girl he had walked away from anymore. I was Rachel Monroe, a woman who had fought for her own worth, and I felt proud of myself. Hey there! Did you like the story? If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot and makes sure you won't miss out on more great stories we share here. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.